want to talk about online communities because the principles that you discuss in this book, as you've mentioned several times, go back thousands of years. And these are time-honored principles, but we have some new ways of employing these principles thanks to new technology and the rise of the internet. And I mentioned things like Facebook groups or Slack channels or Discord servers, and you start to see communities that are built online. You actually do talk about advantages to building communities online. They do allow us to do some things that we have been unable to do before. Can you talk a little bit about what some of those advantages are?
I'm happy to talk about the advantages. It's important that we acknowledge before we talk about online communities, because so many people just assume they are the silver bullet to our loneliness and they are the go-to structure that we should create when we want to bring people together. We need to say on the front side that the research shows that online connection and online communities are a very weak substitute for in-person experiences. So if you're bringing together podcasters or apple pickers or bicyclists, even if it's only 4 times a year, it is important to understand that in-person time is critically important and, quite frankly, changes everything. With that said, yes, there are really powerful advantages online, not the least of which is we can bring people together who are physically incapable of coming together in person, either because of medical challenges or legal challenges, or even just the expense of bringing people together from around the world. So that's one of them. Another one is it's really inexpensive to do that because we don't need to find a building that's big enough. We don't need to set up chairs. We don't need to make sure that the heating works. And we don't need to make sure there's enough parking. So if expense is a real issue, having people connect online eliminates, that all kind of stuff. And where we really find it helpful is when there's a stigma connected to the reason people are gathering. So if there's something that I don't want you to know, Seth, that I'm wrestling with, say abuse in the home or trauma that I'm surviving, and I don't want to broadcast that, I may not want to put up a flyer or necessarily show up in a room that has a sign outside that says, this trauma survivors meet here, 10 a.m. But online, we can do that very, very quietly and then meet regularly with a much lower chance of exposure to tell the whole world that that's a group that we want to be part of, if that's a part of our life that has stigma.
So those are some of the advantages. And like you say in the book, the disadvantage really comes down to online is just not the same thing as being in the same room with people.
Well, it's not that it's just the same thing. We just know it's much less powerful. And the research has been coming out to show exactly in what ways. So for example, we know that even the smell of people that we meet with in person makes a difference in how much we feel connected to them. We also know that there's a great number of nonverbal cues that we interpret when we meet with people that help us feel comfortable and connected that are missing when we do that online. And there's also the issue that we just don't like being online. The example I give, Seth, is if I invited you to my home on Friday night from 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock, to share good pizza and maybe soda, you might be excited for that evening, at least to find out if it's a good time. If I asked you to jump online with me from 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock on a Friday night, you'd laugh out loud. It's just evidence. We don't even like doing it. And then we want people to do more of it to connect. And the worst part is we know it takes longer for people to connect emotionally online than it does in person. So it's a less efficient way to create those relationships, and we all want to do less of it. And when you just play that out for a year or several years in a family or in a workplace, what that translates to is far, far less connection.
Now, the good news here is that this is not necessarily an either or. You can actually create communities that take advantage of being in person, but also sometimes have online communication or find ways to get together online. Do you see organizations doing that successfully?
Absolutely. I can just say that, for example, my wife works for a large tech company and they are remote around the country. And so she overwhelmingly sees them in person. They do have gatherings every few months where they meet in a city and have several days together. And I'm mentioning this because just this last year, at one of these events where she gathered with some colleagues that she talked to several times a week, she discovered that one of her colleagues had a spouse die of cancer within the year. And my wife felt terrible because she's been talking to this person several times a week for months and months, had no idea he lost his spouse. And it didn't come up until they were sharing meals together in person. And it was a great reflection about how they had a certain level of connection online. But as soon as they started sharing live meals together, a whole nother level opened up. He felt comfortable sharing things he could not share online. And then she could express and feel a whole level of empathy for someone who had lost a spouse that she couldn't express before. So both parts are important when people are remote. And what that means is we have to make an investment. If the company had not invested for them to all fly in, be put up and share those meals, that conversation, among many, many others, about what they were dealing with outside of work would have never come up.